How did a small cluster of colonies on the edge of a vast continent grow into the most powerful nation the world has ever seen? The story of America is one of ambition and contradiction, of liberty and oppression, of unity and division. It is shaped by geography, built through struggle, and defined by ideals that have been tested time and again. In the next 15 minutes, we will trace the arc of the United States, from the first peoples who walked this land to the rise of a modern superpower whose choices still shape the world today. Long before Columbus, millions of people lived across North America. The first arrived more than 10,000 years ago, crossing a land bridge from Asia. Over centuries, they spread into forests, plains, deserts, and coasts, adapting with farming, hunting, and trade. Civilizations flourished. The Mississippian culture raised mound cities like Cahokia, home to more than 20,000 people. Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans carved stone dwellings into cliffs and engineered irrigation canals. Along the Pacific coast, nations thrived on salmon harvests. The Northeast, the Haudenosaunee, formed a confederacy governed by councils and consensus. While the precise extent of its direct influence on the U.S. Constitution is a subject of ongoing historical debate, key figures like Benjamin Franklin were familiar with and admired the Confederacy's structure. On the eve of European contact in 1491, North America was not wilderness. It was a continent of fields, towns, trails, and markets, woven by hundreds of languages. Agriculture based on corn, beans, and squash sustained dense populations, and trade moved copper, shells, and obsidian across long distances. This deep past is essential to understanding the continent that newcomers would soon claim. After the voyages of Columbus, European empires raced to plant flags. Spain built missions and forts in Florida and the Southwest. France mapped rivers from the St. Lawrence to the Mississippi and founded trading posts. The Dutch established New Amsterdam on a strategic harbor, but it was Britain whose colonies on the Atlantic coast grew most quickly. Jamestown, founded in 1607, barely survived famine and disease until tobacco brought profits. Plymouth, founded in 1620 by religious separatists, became a symbol of spiritual freedom and community. By the early 1700s, a chain of 13 colonies stretched from New England to Georgia. Geography shaped them. New England fishers and shipwrights worked cold harbors. The middle colonies grew grain and traded through fast-growing ports. The South developed plantations of tobacco, rice, and later cotton. Prosperity also brought injustice. In 1619, the first documented Africans arrived in Virginia. While their legal status was initially fluid, with some being treated as indentured servants who could eventually gain freedom, this soon hardened into a brutal, legally codified system of lifelong chattel slavery based on race. By the mid-1600s, laws were enacted to cement this system and deny rights to people of African descent. By 1770, the number of enslaved people had grown to over 462,000, constituting approximately 1/5 of the total colonial population. The vast majority of these individuals, nearly 350,000, lived in the 5 southern colonies, where their forced labor was the foundation of the plantation economy. Native nations faced displacement and war as settlers claimed their lands. Yet colonists also practiced self-rule in town meetings and assemblies such as the House of Burgesses. Pamphlets and newspapers spread ideas about rights, and a distinct American identity took shape. Diverse, restless, and increasingly skeptical of distant royal power. After Britain won a costly war against France, it tried to tax the colonies to pay the bills. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and duties on everyday goods sparked protests under the cry of no taxation without representation. Tensions escalated with the Boston Massacre and the destruction of taxed tea in Boston Harbor. In April 1775, the first shots of the Revolution rang out at Lexington and Concord. A year later, the Continental Congress declared independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal and endowed with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The war was long and uncertain. George Washington kept the army together through defeat, disease, and winter hunger. Surprise victories at Trenton and Princeton revived morale, and the victory at Saratoga convinced France to become an ally. French ships and soldiers tipped the balance. In 1781 at Yorktown, British forces under Cornwallis surrendered. The Treaty of Paris confirmed independence in 1783. Governing the new nation proved difficult. The Articles of Confederation were too weak to raise revenue or resolve disputes. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia and wrote the Constitution, creating a federal system with checks and balances and 3 branches. The Bill of Rights, ratified on December 15, 1791, safeguarded freedoms of speech, press, religion, and due process. On April 30, 1789, Washington took the oath as the first president, and the experiment in self-government began in earnest. The new nation grew quickly. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 added 828,000 square miles of territory for $15 million, an acquisition that effectively doubled the nation's size and provided a vast highway of rivers to the interior. Lewis and Clark led an expedition to the Pacific, mapping routes and meeting many native nations. Settlers poured westward in wagons, on canals, and later railroads. The belief in manifest destiny claimed that the United States was meant to span ocean to ocean. That belief collided with the rights of indigenous peoples who already lived on the land. Through treaties, removals, broken promises, and wars, native nations were pushed aside as cotton and grain frontiers advanced. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the forced relocation of Native American tribes. This tragic forced march, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the death of an estimated 4,000 Cherokee people, nearly a quarter of their population, from hunger, exposure, and disease. Meanwhile, the Republic added states, acquired Florida, annexed Texas, and won vast lands in the Southwest after a war with Mexico. Expansion stirred a deeper conflict that could not be settled by distance. The northern economy diversified toward free labor industry and small farms, while the southern economy depended on enslaved labor on plantations. Each new territory forced the explosive question of whether slavery could spread. Compromises tried to hold a fragile balance, but tensions rose with violent clashes in Kansas and a Supreme Court ruling that denied citizenship to Black Americans. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on a platform opposing the expansion of slavery into new territories. This sectional victory, in which he won no southern states, prompted South Carolina to secede 1 month later. In the following months, 10 other states followed, forming the Confederacy. The Civil War began when Confederate guns fired on Fort Sumter. It became the deadliest conflict in American history. The Union held advantages in people, factories, money, railroads, and navy, but the Confederacy fought on familiar ground with determined generals. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. While it did not immediately free all enslaved people, as it only applied to states in rebellion against the Union, it fundamentally transformed the war's purpose, adding a moral imperative to the Union cause and enabling thousands of Black men to join the fight for their own freedom. The same year saw turning points at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. By 1865, Union armies broke Confederate resistance, and General Lee surrendered at Appomattox. Lincoln was assassinated days later. The war preserved the nation and ended slavery, but it left deep wounds and vast destruction. In the late 19th century, the United States surged into industrial power. Railroads stitched regions into a continental market. Steel, oil, and electricity transformed production and daily life. Tycoons amassed fortunes, while many workers lived in crowded tenements and toiled long hours for low pay. Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe and Asia, filling factories, building railroads, and reshaping cities. New York, Chicago, and other hubs grew at astonishing speed. Labor unions organized strikes for shorter hours and safer conditions. The gulf between wealth and poverty sparked reform movements and new political ideas. Meanwhile, the nation projected power abroad, defeating Spain, acquiring island territories, and building a canal to link oceans. The United States had become a rising world power, unequal yet dynamic. Reformers pressed government to regulate industry, protect consumers, and preserve natural resources. Muckraking journalists exposed unsafe food, corrupt trusts, and urban poverty. Presidents used antitrust laws against monopolies and expanded national parks and forests. States experimented with workers' compensation, direct primaries, and initiatives. Women organized for decades to win the vote, finally gaining national suffrage when the 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920. Prohibition, intended to curb alcohol abuse, instead fueled speakeasies and organized crime. The Progressive Era demonstrated the capacity of democracy to adapt, even as many reforms ignored racial injustice and immigration prejudice. The crash cascaded into bank failures, deflation, and mass unemployment. Farmers faced drought and dust storms, and families lost homes. Franklin Roosevelt promised bold action. His administration stabilized banks, launched public works, supported unions, insured deposits, and created Social Security. The New Deal did not end the slump, but it relieved suffering and redefined the relationship between citizens and the federal government. By the late 1930s, storm clouds gathered overseas. War erupted in Europe and Asia. After Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States entered the conflict. Factories converted to war production, women and minorities filled industrial jobs, and millions of service members fought across two oceans. In Europe, the Allies landed in North Africa, Italy, and then Normandy, liberating cities and uncovering the horrors of the Holocaust. In the Pacific, the United States waged island campaigns and cut supply lines. Atomic bombs dropped on two Japanese cities forced surrender. The war ended with the United States potent in industry, science, and arms. It helped create the United Nations and shaped a new economic order. Rivalry with the Soviet Union defined the next era. The United States contained communism through alliances, aid, and sometimes war. Fears of nuclear conflict shadowed daily life as both sides built devastating arsenals. The nation fought in Korea to defend the South and later in Vietnam, with tragic costs and deep divisions at home. At the same time, citizens challenged segregation and discrimination. Court rulings struck down school segregation, and activists led boycotts, sit-ins, marches, and voter registration drives. Leaders called the nation to live up to its founding promises. Landmark laws in 1964 and 1965 outlawed legal segregation and protected voting rights, though struggles for equality continued. Social movements for women, Native rights, Latino rights, gay rights, and environmental protection broadened the meaning of citizenship. A landing on the moon symbolized scientific reach even as Watergate exposed abuses of power and eroded public trust. In the 1980s, the United States increased defense spending and engaged the Soviet Union in arms talks. Reform and pressure within the communist world produced revolutions in Eastern Europe and the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union was formally dissolved, ending the Cold War. The United States emerged as the sole superpower, confident yet uncertain about new responsibilities. The 1990s saw economic growth, trade agreements, and the rise of the Internet. American companies built a digital economy that connected people across the planet, yet benefits were uneven and inequality widened. On September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked New York and Washington, killing thousands and launching long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Security expanded at airports and in intelligence, and debates intensified about liberty and safety. The financial crisis of 2008 triggered recession, job losses, and foreclosures. Recovery came slowly and unevenly. Political polarization sharpened, amplified by cable news and social media. At the same time, the country grew more diverse and more connected. Voters elected the first Black president, and later the Supreme Court recognized marriage equality. Movements for racial justice demanded accountability and reform. Fires, floods, and storms underscored climate risk, while new technologies like smartphones and artificial intelligence reshaped work and culture. The history of the United States is a story of reinvention, from colonies to republic, from civil war to superpower. It is a history filled with contradictions, liberty and slavery, prosperity and inequality, unity and division. And yet, through every trial, the nation has found paths forward. Its past is not only national history, but world history, because the story of America is the story of how one nation reshaped the modern world. If you found this journey compelling, please like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more stories that connect the past to the present for viewers everywhere.